How's it going, everybody? Too Spooky here. Now, in this video today, we are going to be talking about Nen from Hunter x Hunter. We are going to be going over what exactly Nen is, the different principles and techniques that come along with it, and we'll be going over all of the other details involved with Nen and how it works. So essentially, I'm going to be explaining everything you will ever need to know about Nen. Because Nen is a pretty complex and important aspect of Hunter x Hunter as a whole, if you don't fully understand how it works, you might find yourself lost or confused in certain situations. And because Nen is such a driving force in Hunter x Hunter, I think it's probably the most important topic to cover. Also, as a forewarning, my pronunciation is god-awful, so I'm likely going to mispronounce a few things throughout this video. And we are also going to be covering a lot of information, so hopefully you don't get lost. So let's begin with what exactly Nen is. Nen is the technique that allows any living being to manipulate their own life energy, which is known as aura. Now, to put this simply, pretty much everything that involves Nen has to do with aura. And Nen as a whole is just an overall term for the use or manipulation of aura. So let's move on to what exactly aura is. Aura is essentially life energy like we just stated, but there's a lot more to it. You see, this life energy is produced by all living bodies and plays an important role in keeping that person or being alive. This aura also flows through every part of a person's body and generally flows together to create one giant mass of energy. This flow of energy will happen regardless of whether the person knows about Nen or not. Before someone learns about the concept of Nen or that aura even exists, their aura will constantly be flowing without their knowledge. And because of that, this aura flow will result in a small leak that causes aura to constantly flow outside of the body. However, someone who has learned Nen is able to allow this aura to constantly flow, but at the same time is able to control and manipulate it in many different ways, and is able to stop their aura from leaking out of their body. This flow of aura is also caused by aura nodes, which are the many points on the body where aura can flow from. And the first step to learning Nen is learning how to control these aura nodes. It should also be noted that severe injuries such as losing a limb or some other mutilation can cause these aura nodes to stop flowing in that body part, or stop the aura flow altogether. However, this is where things get a little confusing, because aura is considered life energy, and if you lose all of your aura, you essentially lose your life as well and will die. But in the case of a severe injury that stops your aura from flowing, you will not die, because you aren't actually losing your aura, you are just instead losing your ability to control it. And as far as we know, once an individual loses their Nen, there is no way to get it back. Before we move on to how someone learns about Nen and how to control it, we quickly need to cover how Nen is perceived in the world of Hunter x Hunter. Well, the thing is, most people don't know that Nen or aura exist. This is mainly because Nen is kept secret from the general public by the Hunters Association. From what we know, the main reason as to why Nen is kept secret is because if someone were to teach or even explain Nen to someone in a public setting, it would be possible for those with bad intentions to potentially learn about an extremely dangerous ability. So because of this rule, Nen can only be taught and learned in secret, and it is against the law for any licensed hunter to reveal the existence of Nen to someone who doesn't know about it, and can only do so in an emergency. Because the public are unaware of Nen's existence, there are people outside of the Hunters Association who develop the ability to control their aura without knowing anything about it or without being taught. These people are generally known to the public as psychics, superhumans, or geniuses, and they can do anything from use the basic properties of Nen, or somehow develop a unique Nen ability without having any idea how they were able to do so. In regards to hunters, they are actually not considered a professional hunter until they learn the basic principles of Nen, even if they have already completed the hunter's exam. This is known as the secret hunter exam, and as soon as the hunter learns about Nen, they pass the secret hunter exam, and are then known as a professional hunter. hunter. If someone already knows the basic principles of Nen when taking the regular hunter exam, if they pass, they are automatically considered a pro hunter and do not need to take the secret exam. So now that we have that covered, let's talk about how someone goes about learning Nen and how to control it. To begin learning Nen, the first step is learning how to open and close their aura nodes manually so they can control the flow of their aura. And there are two known methods of learning how to do this. The first method is very slowly and gradually learning how through patience and meditation. And the second method is called initiation, which is where the individual receives a hefty amount of aura from an experienced Nen user, which forces their aura nodes to open. However, this method can be dangerous because it can easily harm the individual if the Nen user is inexperienced or has malicious intent. Initiation can also be performed by physically assaulting the individual with Nen, but this is even more dangerous as it almost always causes permanent damage or even death. There is also a different form of initiation, which is known as Geihau. This is the least dangerous version of initiation, and involves an experienced Nen user using their aura to very gently open an individual's aura nodes, which will then force the individual to learn how to control their aura, or experience severe exhaustion or in some cases death. When an individual opens up their aura nodes, they are then able to see their own aura, because the aura nodes in their eyes open up as well. Aura itself appears similar to steam or a white mist. Something else that should be mentioned is that Nen can be felt even if the person feeling it has no clue that Nen exists, and it has been said that Nen feels like a warm liquid flowing, or if the Nen user is very powerful, it can even feel like needles constantly pricking their skin. And in addition to that, Nen can also be felt through the user's emotions. Although aura is considered life energy, it is somehow able to carry the user's emotions and desires along with it. The best example is known as bloodlust, which is where an individual channels their anger and malicious intent into their aura as they deploy it towards another person. That person is then able to feel all of that malicious intent and anger surround them. This generally stops the individual in their tracks, unable to move forward or move at all for that matter. And if this bloodlust is exceptionally malicious, it can even harm the other person if they don't deploy their own Nen as a defense. So now that we've discussed the very first step of learning Nen, you may be wondering what comes next. Well, the next step of learning Nen is known as the 4 basic principles, which are Ten, Zetsu, Ren, and Hotsu. We will go over what each one does individually, of course, but each of these principles are basic manipulations of someone's aura flow in one way or another. It should also be noted that since these are basic techniques, they are hard to learn and maintain at first. But after the user becomes much more experienced, each of these techniques becomes second nature and can be done without a second thought. So the first principle is Ten. After having all of their aura nodes open, the user then needs to learn how to control their aura and keep their aura from leaking away from their body. So Ten itself is the process of keeping the aura nodes open, but also having their aura flow through and around their body rather than away from it. Once Ten is achieved, it creates a shroud of aura around the body that apparently feels like standing in lukewarm water. Ten is also the most basic defense against Nen attacks, but it cannot defend against regular physical attacks. Ten also has a different long-term ability, which is the fact that it reduces aging and allows the individual to keep a youthful appearance. This is because the user's aura no longer leaks away, which, considering aura is life energy, sealing the leak of life, so to speak, slows down the aging process significantly over time. And with practice and meditation, the user will be able to maintain Ten subconsciously at all times. The second principle is Zetsu. So with Ten, the user keeps their aura from leaking away from the body, but Zetsu stops the flow of aura altogether by closing all of the user's aura nodes. Because the user is no longer surrounded by their aura, they are much more sensitive or aware of the aura coming from other users. This is generally used as a way to track others without being noticed, and other Nen users also won't notice them because they are no longer producing any aura. However, this isn't the only use of Zetsu. You see, Zetsu can also be used to relieve fatigue and regain energy, because it forces the aura surrounding the body back inside, essentially returning unused life energy. Although at the same time, using Zetsu does have its downfalls. because using Zetsu removes all aura protecting the user, which makes the user defenseless against any Nen attacks, and even a weak Nen attack is enough to do massive damage to the user. The third principle is Ren. Ren itself focuses on heavily increasing the user's amount of aura and keeps it around the body, which will expand the size and intensity of it. This technique is a direct extension of Ten, and cannot be used unless the user is somewhat experienced in using it. Because the user is capable of keeping aura outside of their body without it leaking, they are then able to use Ren to produce more aura around themselves without having to worry about losing it. Ren is generally used for offensive techniques, and increases the user's physical strength and durability, and also provides a large amount of aura to be used for advanced techniques, which we will talk about later. And the final principle is Hotsu. Now, Hotsu will be a little bit harder to explain, because there are certain aspects of it we will be touching upon later in the video, but I will do my best to make it easy to understand without the additional information. Hotsu is essentially the release of someone's aura that is manipulated to perform a specific ability that is unique to the user. These qualities depend on the user's natural category, which we will talk about later, but they are not limited to it. This basically results in the user's personal expression of Nen that ends up creating a special and unique ability that is created by the user over time. These are known as Nen abilities, Hotsu abilities, or simply Hotsu. These Hotsu abilities are not directly obtained from the other three basic principles, although in some cases they can be, and these Hotsu abilities generally reflect the individual's character in one way or another. So to put it simply, Hotsu is an individual's own uniquely crafted Nen ability that can be used for a number of different purposes depending on the user. So now that we've talked about the four major principles, let's move on to the advanced techniques. Now, these advanced techniques are generally learned after an individual is familiar with Ten, Zetsu, and Ren, and the majority of these techniques are combinations of those. Hotsu, on the other hand, is something the user develops on their own over time, so someone would not need to have a Hotsu ability to begin learning these advanced techniques. The first technique we'll talk about is Gyo. Gyo is a more advanced rendition of Ren, which is where the user concentrates a larger amount of aura into one specific part of the body, which will in turn strengthen that body part, but leave the rest of the body more vulnerable. Gyo can be used in many different ways, but it is generally used on the user's eyes, which allows them to see aura or other objects that are hidden from the user. The second technique is known as In. Now, you know how I just mentioned aura or objects that are hidden from the user? Well, this is the result of In. In is an advanced form of Zetsu, where the user is able to almost completely conceal their aura from others. Unlike Zetsu, the user doesn't need to stop their aura flow, but instead just hides it. So this technique is very useful for setting traps or sneak attacks, but it can be easily countered with Gyo, because the user will then be able to see whatever was hidden. The third technique is known as En. En is an advanced version of both Ren and Ten. With Ren, aura usually only protrudes a small distance away from the user's body, but with En, the user extends their aura a much greater distance. And then the individual uses Ten to shape this aura, which is usually shaped into a circle. When using En, the user can feel the shape and movement of anything that enters their circle. The downside of En is that it is very tiring to keep up, because the user needs to be constantly deploying aura. It should also be mentioned that the radius of En is different for each user, and it's also different depending on how experienced the user is with using En. The fourth technique is known as Ken. Just like En, Ken is also an advanced version of both Ren and Ten, although it is mostly derived from Ren. Ken is basically an amplified form of Ren, where the user creates a defensive barrier of aura that surrounds the user's body. This technique is very useful because it can defend the user from attacks that come from any direction. Because the user is protecting every part of their body at once, like En, this requires a lot more aura than usual. So it is very tiring to use Ken for extended periods of time. The fifth technique is known as Ryu. Ryu is essentially essentially the technique for using Gyo in real time, by concentrating aura to one location of the body whenever needed during a battle. For instance, say two Nen users are battling. The first guy is throwing a punch at the second, and right before his punch makes contact, he concentrates all of his aura onto his fist to make it a very powerful attack. Although doing so, he also makes the rest of his body more vulnerable. And then the second guy is anticipating where this punch will strike, and as soon as he figures it out, he concentrates all of his aura onto his arm to block the punch. And you have to keep in mind that these examples happen in mere seconds, and that is what is known as Ryu. The sixth technique is known as Shu. Shu is an advanced version of Ten, which allows the user to extend their aura onto an object outside of their body, allowing them to use that object as if it were an extension of their own body. This also in turn increases the strength of whatever object the user is using Shu on. The user can also decide how much aura they are applying to that object, which will also decide just how much stronger that object will become. And the final technique is known as Ko. Ko is essentially an advanced version of Gyo, but it is created from a mixture of Ten, Ren, and Zetsu all in one. Ko is where the user focuses their aura into a single part of their body, similar to Gyo. But at the same time, they use Zetsu to shut down their aura flow to every other part of their body. This is both very powerful and very risky. It's very powerful because the user is essentially placing 100% of their Nen into that single area, which will result in a very powerful attack. But this also leaves the rest of their body vulnerable, because they are no longer protected by any aura. But that does it for all of the advanced techniques, so now let's move on to aura types. There are a total of 6 different aura types, which are Enhancement, Transmutation, Emission, Conjuration, Manipulation, and Specialization. Every single person is born with one of these aura types, and each one allows the user to do a wide variety of different techniques. Once a user finds out what aura type they are then able to fully develop their Hotsu ability like we talked about earlier. And an individual's Hotsu ability is almost always reminiscent of that user's aura type. Now, to find out what an individual's aura type is, they need to do so through water divination. Now, water divination is where the user places a glass of water in front of them, with a leaf on top of the water, and then places their hands beside the glass and performs Ren. And then the user will know what their aura type is depending on what happens to the water. If the volume of the water changes, the user is an enhancer. If the taste of the water changes, the user is a transmuter. If some sort of impurity appears in the water, the user is a conjurer. If the color of the water changes, the user is an emitter. If the leaf moves upon the surface of the water, the user is a manipulator. And if some sort of different change occurs that doesn't match the rest, the user is a specialist. So now let's go over exactly what each of these aura types are and what they allow the user to possibly do. The first one we'll talk about is Enhancement. Enhancement is the ability to use aura to increase the natural abilities of an object or the user's own body. So essentially, the user is able to greatly increase their physical strength, physical defense, or both with their aura. And enhancement techniques are generally most useful for close range attacks. Enhancement is considered the most balanced aura type, and easily allows the user to spread their abilities evenly between offense and defense, and to become very strong using only simple abilities. One example of a simple enhancement ability is being able to strengthen the power of the user's arms. And one example of a more complex enhancement ability is being able to enhance the user's own healing factor. The second one is Conjuration. Conjuration is the ability to create a physical, independent material object out of aura. Generally, conjurers learn over time how to create a handful of different objects that revolve around whatever Hotsu they develop. And once the conjurer has grown experienced enough, they are able to conjure up these objects and then dispel them in an instant. Conjuration is also the only way someone can create objects out of Nen that non-Nen users can see and touch. This is because these objects are created from Nen, but once they are created, they are no longer Nen, but instead whatever object they are. Conjured objects are also somewhat independent in the sense that they will continue to exist, even if the conjurer is a great distance away. It should also be noted that with enough practice, the user is able to essentially conjure any object. But most of them generally stick to the same handful involved with their Hotsu, instead of branching away from that. The third one is emission. Emission is the ability to control the deployment of aura while separating it from the user's own body. Normally, whenever someone would separate aura away from their body, it would dissipate very quickly after leaving the source. However, once an emitter becomes very strong, they are able to separate this aura for very long periods of time, and they are also able to control all of its functions even if the aura is a great distance away from the user's body. One example of an emission ability would be the user being able to create weapons out of aura, like an arrow for instance, that the user can control however they please. The fourth one is transmutation. Transmutation is the ability to change the properties of one's aura to mimic something else. Just like emission, anything created by transmutation is pure aura. Now, a lot of times transmutation and its abilities are easily confused with conjuration because they are very similar. But the best way to tell them apart is the fact that conjuration creates real objects with Nen, while transmutation only copies or mimics the properties of something that is real, but doesn't actually become it. In addition to that, you don't necessarily need to copy the properties of something real, because you can also mix properties to create something new, such as mixing the property of heat with something hard like steel, which would perhaps spawn molten hot knives or whatever else the user wants to create. The fifth one is manipulation. Manipulation is the ability for the user to control both non-living and living objects in a certain way dependent on the user, along with controlling aura itself. The main advantage of manipulation is being able to control enemies or even non-living allies. How the user is able to control others is also dependent on the user's Hotsu. Some need to attach objects to the individual to control them, while others just need to touch them in a certain way, or in some cases they don't need to touch them at all. Manipulators are also the Nen users who can pour the most aura into an object. And the final one is specialization. Specialization is a bit harder to explain, because it is considered anything that doesn't fit in the other 5 categories, making it the vaguest Nen category. To give some examples of specialization, Neon is able to unconsciously write the future of a specific person, after receiving certain specific information about them because of a ghostwriter that she unconsciously manifests. And another example would be Crollo Lucifer, who is able to steal anyone's Nen ability, so long as certain conditions are fulfilled. So a specialist can be considered many different things, so long as they do not fit with the other 5 categories. Now, I should mention that even if someone is confirmed to be a certain aura type, they are still able to use abilities from other aura types with practice. And in some very rare cases, the individual can learn how to use abilities from each aura type. So let me introduce you to the aura type chart. As you can see, all 6 of the aura types are present here, but the way they are labeled may seem a bit random. Well, this chart is actually based on the percentages of how efficiently someone would be at using an aura type they were not born into. So basically how this works is the aura type the individual is born with gives them 100% potential in being efficient with that aura type. For this example, we will use enhancement. So the user in this scenario is an enhancer, meaning that they have 100% potential to use the enhancement aura type. So because we are looking at enhancement, we place it at the top. Now the 2 aura types next to the one we've chosen now have 80% potential for the user to use that aura type efficiently. So again, because we are looking at enhancement, the 2 aura types next to this on the chart are emission and transmutation. So the enhancement user has has 80% potential to use these aura types for different abilities, meaning that these aura types are relatively easy for them to use, but they will not be able to use them as efficiently as enhancement. Now, the next two aura types, which are 2 types away, have 60% potential, which in this case are Manipulation and Conjuration, meaning that our enhancer would have a pretty difficult time using these 2 aura types, but with lots of training, they would eventually be able to use them. However, because they only have 60% potential with them, even if they learn how to use these abilities, they will only ever be able to use them with 60% efficiency, meaning they will never be very useful or powerful compared to their other abilities. Now, the final aura type that is at the very bottom of the chart, vertical to the one at the top, has 40% potential, in this case being Specialization. So for an enhancer, it is hardest for them to use specialist abilities, and almost all enhancers will never develop a specialist ability. However, this is where things get tricky once again, because unless someone is born with a specialist ability, it is almost impossible for anyone to develop one of these abilities over time. So if we were to flip the chart around, so you would think that conjurers and manipulators have an 80% chance to develop a specialist ability because they are next to it on the chart, but in reality this is not the case. However, conjurers and manipulators do have the best chance out of all the aura types to become a specialist, with a whopping 1% chance that they will develop a specialist ability, which is why they are next to Specialization on the chart. So in this case, the enhancer we're talking about has basically no chance of ever developing a specialist ability. Now, I'm sorry if that part was a little bit confusing. I tried to make it as understandable as possible, but of course some things are easier to explain than others. The next thing we need to address are vows and limitations. Because Nen is life energy, it responds to the goals, strengths, and desires of each individual user. And because of this, the user is able to set certain restrictions with their abilities that will result in making their abilities stronger, so long as the conditions for the restrictions are met. These conditions are called limitations, and the act of swearing to uphold these conditions are called vows. The stricter the limitation is, the stronger the ability will become. These limitations are both a blessing and a curse, because depending on the severity of the restrictions, it could put the user in some pretty bad situations where they will not be able to uphold their vows to respect those limitations, in turn losing their extra strength from the limitations. Limitations that involve some sort of punishment should the user fail to uphold their vows will also strengthen these abilities exponentially. For instance, if the user were to say, "If I break this rule, I will die," the ability linked with this limitation will be much stronger because it has such a high risk depending on the conditions. So it is possible for abilities to be much stronger than they would normally be without any limitations. Now, at this point in the video, we've covered almost everything, but there are still a few things we have yet to talk about, which are certain subcategories that are grouped together regardless of what aura type they fall under. So let's start with curses. A curse is considered some sort of nen that is placed on another individual that is detrimental to that person in some way, such as taking away one of that person's abilities or their ability to use nen altogether. These curses are considered very dangerous because of their long-lasting effects, and will continue to affect that person even after the person who applied the curse dies. And in some cases, the curse will become even stronger after that person's death. Each curse is different, of course, and some curses will just fade away with time, or the curse will leave once the cursed individual follows some sort of conditions to remove it. However, there are some curses that will follow the cursed individual until the day they die, and sometimes even after death. There is also one other way to remove a curse, which is through the use of nen, and this is called exorcism. There are people out there who are so skilled with nen that they are able to remove curses from most individuals, and they are called exorcists. However, these exorcists are very rare, and the Hunters Association only has one exorcist throughout the entire organization, and there is estimated to be few fewer than 10 exorcists that can remove curses from the dead in the entire world. And finally, the last thing we need to go over are symbiotic and parasitic types. Symbiotic types are essentially abilities that require multiple Nen users doing different tasks to collaborate together to perform a certain overall task or ability, such as a conjurer creating a doll and then a manipulator controlling it. And parasitic types are a little bit on the weird side. You see, parasitic types are very similar to curses, but not quite the same. Instead, parasitic types are Hotsu abilities that are placed onto another person, with or without that person's knowledge. This Hotsu ability will then feed off of that individual's aura and act on its own, usually with some sort of task in mind, like protecting that person or attacking people who come near them. It is currently unknown if the person who places this Hotsu ability is able to control it afterwards, or if the Hotsu ability just controls itself at all times. And although we don't have 100% confirmation on this, it is ideal for the user to place this Hotsu on someone who does not know about Nen, because they will be unable to see the parasite around them or even know it's there, and instead will just feel very tired instead of knowing this parasite is essentially sucking out their life energy. But that is pretty much everything you guys will ever need to know about Nen. So I really hope that you guys learned something new or found a better understanding about Nen or any aspects of it. If you guys did learn something new or you just enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, and I would really appreciate it if you did. Also, make sure to comment down below what you guys want me to make a video about next. And while you're at it, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have already subscribed, make sure to hit that notification bell so you can be notified the second I put out a brand new video. Anyways guys, thank you all so much for watching this video today, and if you can't get enough of that too spooky content, well, why don't you click here for 10 facts about Hisoka? And if that's not doing it for you, well, why don't you click here for every single Kekkei Genkai in Naruto explained. But anyways guys, thank you so much again, and I will see you all soon with a new video.